The first station, Jesus is condemned to death. From the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why, what evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Jesus stands dishonoured and defenceless before Pilate. Pilate is not utterly evil. He knows Jesus is innocent, and he looks for a way to free him. But his heart is divided. And in the end, he lets his own position, his own self-interest prevail over what is right. Nor are those who are shouting and demanding the death of Jesus utterly evil. But at that moment they are caught up in the crowd. They are shouting because everyone else is shouting, and they are shouting the same thing that everyone else is shouting. And in this way, justice is trampled underfoot by weakness, cowardice, and fear. The quiet voice of conscience is drowned out by the cries of the crowd. Evil draws its power from indecision and concern for what other people think. Let us pray. Lord, strengthen the quiet voice of our conscience, your own voice in our lives. Look at each of us as you looked at Peter after his denial. Let your gaze penetrate our hearts and show us the direction our lives must take. Grant us ever anew the grace of conversion. Amen. The second station, Jesus takes up his cross. From the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to be crucified. Jesus is condemned and ridiculed as an impostor king, and yet it is because Jesus is mocked and wears the crown of suffering that he is the true king. His scepter is justice. The price of justice in this world is suffering. Jesus, the true king, does not reign through violence, but through a love which suffers for us and with us. He takes up the cross, the burden of being human, the burden of the world. And so he goes before us and points us to the way which leads to true life. Let us pray. Lord, you willingly subjected yourself to mockery and scorn. Help us not to ally ourselves with those who look down on the weak and suffering. Help us to acknowledge your face in the lowly and outcast. May we never lose heart when faced with the contempt of this world. You carried your own cross and you ask us to follow you on this path. Help us to take up the cross and not to shun it. May we never complain or become discouraged by life's trials. Help us to follow the path of love, and of submitting to its demands to find true joy.